the Navy had this top secret communication system called SR-1. He was doing it all clandestinely through SR-1. The Hawks were alarmed, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff actually initiated an espionage ring against the Nixon administration. Watergate is a conspiracy within a conspiracy, and I'll kind of explain that later. But Watergate is so complex. There's so much misdirection going on. And the media's portrayal of Watergate is and magnanimous. I mean, it's an enormous lie. And with Watergate, okay, so Nixon got elected in 1968, and he'd been a hawk. He'd been really an anti-communist hawk. He was in the House on un-American activities, going after people. And he ran for president in 1960, and he got beat by JFK. And then he ran for California governor in 1962, and he got beat. And then he moved to New York and thought he was done with politics. And he was pretty acerbic. When he got beat for governor, he said some pretty nasty things about the media. But then in 1966, 67, he saw America becoming unglued by the Vietnam War and all the protests. And that was like horrifying to most Americans. But to Nixon, it was a siren song. It summoned him back to politics. And while he had spent 8 years in the wilderness, he had concluded that containment with the Soviet Union and the communists wasn't working. And he wanted to actually become a peacemaker. And when he was campaigning in 68, and I'm not a Nixon apologist. He did some good things, he did some bad things. But when he was campaigning in 67, he was talking about, I'm going to be the peacemaker. And everybody thought, oh, this is just Nixon lying and, it's just a cynical campaign ploy. But when he did get elected, he started reaching out to the communist Chinese, and he started reaching out to the Russians. He wanted to do strategic arm limitations with the Soviet Union, and he wanted to open up China for diplomatic relations, because once China had become communist, once Mao had defeated Chiang Kai-shek, we just completely ostracized China. And Nixon knew that he was going to have to go up against the Hawks to do this. And he knew how much power the Hawks had. And on I think it's the second day, he came out with National Security Memorandum Decision 2, which sounds kind of like an innocuous bureaucratic directive. But basically what he said is that the CIA, the Department of Defense, and the State Department will have no bearing on any of my geopolitical moves. So basically, he was telling the Hawks to go to hell. And then he took the National Security Council, which had been kind of like a think tank, and he turned that into something that would have bearing on his geopolitical moves. And Richard Helms, who was the head of the CIA, he would allow Helms to brief the National Security Council, but as soon as he was done briefing, he would have to leave. He was persona non grata. And Nixon really disliked Helms, really disliked him. And actually, he thought that the CIA had burned him in the 1960 political campaign against JFK, because JFK was attacking him and the Eisenhower administration for being soft on communism, even though the Eisenhower administration was gearing up for what would be the Bay of Pigs. And Nixon thought that the CIA had told that to Kennedy and undermined his run for the presidency at that point. So Nixon didn't like the CIA, and he wanted to become a peacemaker. So he started making overtures to the communists, the Chinese, and then the Russians. He really wanted to de-escalate the arms race. And he was doing all this clandestinely through the Navy had this top secret communication system called SR1. He was doing it all clandestinely through SR1. And the Hawks were alarmed. And the Joint Chiefs of Staff actually initiated an espionage ring against the Nixon administration. There was Thomas Moore. He was the head of the Joint Chiefs. He was an admiral. And it's called the Moore-Radford affair because Radford was this lowly yeoman who was the liaison between the Joint Chiefs and the National Security Council. And Haig was the inside man for them at the National Security Council. And Haig was enabling Radford to get all these top secret documents. Like, we were allies with India, but Pakistan had a dictator that was friendly to China. So the Nixon administration, although Pakistan and India were engaged at a war, the Nixon administration tacitly approved what Pakistan was doing. And then probably Admiral Moore leaked it out to the press, and there was this huge blowback because the Pakistan dictator was kind of a bloodthirsty type. But Nixon wanted so badly to open up communications with the Chinese that he was willing to do these things. And so the Joint Chiefs has this espionage ring where they're collecting all this information on what Nixon's doing. But the Nixon administration ultimately outs them. And at that point, the CIA starts infiltrating. And the guys it's amazing how many CIA people, intelligence people infiltrate the Nixon administration. And the big thing with Watergate is there were two conspiracies going on, but the first conspiracy was the CIA trying to bring down the Nixon administration. And there were a number of leaks going on, like the Pakistan leak and the Pentagon Papers and these various leaks, and they were driving Nixon crazy. And Ehrlichman put together a crew called the Plumbers, and the raison d'etre for the Plumbers was to plug leaks. And that's where these CI guys ended up, is E. Howard Hunt, who was a scurrilous guy, and James McCord, who was... It's kind of difficult to describe James McCord, but they penetrated the Plumbers. And G. Gordon Liddy was supposedly the head of the Plumbers, but McCord and Hunt, these guys were like super spooks, and they just ran circles around Liddy. Liddy had no idea what these guys were up to. And then, so you've got the CIA wanting to take down Nixon and infiltrating the Plumbers. But you've got something else going on. John Dean, who is one of the heroes of Watergate, who saw that he saw the moral turpitude of the Nixon administration and came clean and helped bring Nixon down. John Dean, there's some amazing liars, extraordinary liars in Watergate, but John Dean is right up there with Woodward and Bernstein when it comes to lies. But John Dean's wife, Maureen Dean, knew or worked for a woman named Heidi Reichen. And Heidi Reichen ran a brothel that was a block away from the Watergate. And if you were a Democratic big shot, you go to it. There's a secretary named Maxie Wells at the Democratic National Committee. You would go to her, and she would provide you pictures of the prostitutes. And you would choose the prostitute that you liked, and then you'd go to the Columbia was like upscale apartments. And then you would go to the Columbia, and then you'd have a liaison with the prostitute that you liked, but the CI was filming it. It was run by McCord, that particular honey trap, and you've got these two dynamics with Watergate. You've got the CIA wanting to take the Nixon administration down, and then you've got this brothel that's connected to the DNC. That's a CIA honey trap.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.